By our 8th year together, he went and registered his marriage with my younger sister. Bookmark, go back. Emily, I'm just doing this so the baby can have a legal household, he said. For now, you'll have to put up with little unfairness. Unfairness? I looked at my bank account, at the company's steadily rising stock prices, and thought to myself, it didn't seem all that unfair. A year later, he came back to ask me to get back together with him. I held my husband's arm, gently stroking my rounded belly. My child isn't some bastard who needs a cheap father, I said evenly. At that moment, Ethan Summers completely lost control. I had always believed that the love between us was mutual. We'd been together for 8 years. I had stayed by his side from the time he was a nobody until the day he became a public figure. Countless late nights, his breathing was right beside my ear. He used to hold my hand and whisper, "Emily, I'm so lucky to have you." Everyone thought we would get married until they saw the marriage certificate he posted on WeChat. The bride's name wasn't mine, it was Chloe Summers. Chloe, my half-sister, and also his first love. Emily getting pregnant before marriage would ruin her reputation as a woman, he said. Chloe is your sister. Would you really stand by and not help her? Ethan looked at me with a face full of self-righteous certainty, as if everything he said was perfectly reasonable. I couldn't help but laugh at the man standing before me, the man who had loved me and been with me through all my youthful years. Yet all he could think about was Chloe's reputation. What about mine? Did he ever think that if he married another woman, I would become the laughingstock in everyone's eyes? Of course he knew. He knew exactly how much I'd be hurt, but he was gambling, betting that I would swallow my pain, accept all the unfairness, and still support his decision, just like I always had before. Emily, it's just for 1 year, he said softly. Maybe because I stayed silent, Ethan lifted my cold hands into his, trying to warm my frozen fingertips. Then he spoke gently. Aren't you afraid of pain? After Chloe gives birth, we'll raise the baby together. From then on, the 4 of us will live happily. Wouldn't that be nice? My throat burned painfully. I stared into the tenderness in his eyes for a long while before pulling my hand away. Do whatever you want, I said quietly. If you want to live with as many people as you please, then go ahead. The year I met Ethan Summers, I was 18. It was at Chloe's birthday party, which also happened to be mine. But everyone was gathered around her, cutting cake and offering blessings under the bright lights of the hall. Meanwhile, I was outside, wearing one of her old princess dresses, holding a plate of steamed buns, crouching on the stone steps in the yard to light my candles. Those candles were the ones Chloe didn't want anymore, but I didn't care. Just as I finished lighting them and was about to make a wish, I looked up and saw Ethan Summers. He wasn't inside celebrating with Chloe. Instead, he walked toward me with that smug, confident air, looked down at me arrogantly, and said, "When you make a wish, if no one's watching, the spirits get lazy." I didn't say a word, but thinking back, I must have looked really silly at that moment, so much so that Ethan Summers, even though he was standing right next to me, didn't react at all. It wasn't until he leaned down and whispered in my ear, his tone teasing and playful, "Then I'll be your witness. So, are you planning to share half of that cake with me later?" Afterward, I lost count of how many times I thought about that moment, wondering why someone as cautious and guarded as me could fall for Ethan Summers so easily. Maybe it was because of the circumstances in which we first met. That night, under the soft glow of the moonlight, he looked so captivating. Later, I found out that night Ethan had been trying to secure an investment from my father. As a college student starting a business, he was struggling to find his footing, especially when pitching to a newly successful investor like my dad. I secretly tried to help him, casually mentioning his ideas and technical knowledge to my father during dinner. When his competitors showed up, I even stirred my father's temper just enough to make him lash out at them instead. By my sophomore year of college, I volunteered to work as Ethan's assistant, 24 hours a day, without pay. For 8 years, I stayed with him through everything. From a tiny 5-square-meter basement office to the top floor of a luxury apartment. I watched him go from frustrated and broke to soaring high above everyone else. During those hard times, we often shared a single cup of instant noodles each day. Even the boiling water was something the cafeteria owner gave us for free. Back then, Ethan would often take my hand, his eyes red, and say, "Emily, trust me. Someday, I won't let you suffer for me anymore." For 8 years, I truly believed that day would come. But now I realize that day was nothing more than a picture of a cake drawn on a wall. It looked real, but no matter how close I reached, I could never touch it. So now, I no longer crave that piece of cake. When Chloe Summers moved into the villa, she brought 4 32-inch suitcases, all packed to the brim. Whether intentional or not, she didn't let anyone help her. She just looked at me pitifully and said, "You know, sis, I have this obsession with cleanliness. I really hate it when other people touch my things." Chloe was 3 months pregnant then. Her belly wasn't showing yet, but when she spoke, she instinctively supported her lower back and looked up at me with a harmless, innocent smile. Everything in here was specially bought by Ethan for the baby. I told him it wasn't necessary. The baby's only 3 months along, there's no need to rush, but he wouldn't listen. Still, I guess it's understandable. It's his first time being a father. He just wants to give the baby the whole world. "Oh, I almost forgot. You've never experienced that, have you?" She covered her mouth and feigned embarrassment, but the pride in her eyes was impossible to hide. I said nothing. Of course, I couldn't understand what that felt like. The year I was born was the lowest point in my father's life. My mother was so poor she couldn't even afford to give birth in a hospital. She had to hide in a drafty rental house, boil a pot of hot water, grab a pair of scissors, and endure the pain alone through the night until I came into this world. 3 days after I was born, she ran away. A newborn who hadn't even tasted her mother's milk was taken by my father back to his hometown and handed to my grandparents to raise. Years later, when my father got rich and remarried, my younger sister Chloe was born. She received the best of everything. Even before she came into the world, my father had already booked the most expensive maternity suite at a private hospital, hired 3 nutritionists, and ensured that every piece of her clothing, even her swaddles, was from a luxury brand. When I was 10 years old, my father finally brought me from the countryside back to the Cole family home. That was when I first learned that you could take a bath every day. That there didn't always have to be dirt under your fingernails, and that at night you could sleep without rats crawling across your bed. My father loved Chloe so much that even if he went bankrupt, he would still scrape together money to send her abroad. Ethan Summers loved her too. They had broken up only because he didn't want to delay her bright future. Now, looking at the beautiful, delicate woman in front of me, I couldn't help but smile. "It's fine," I said softly. "I wouldn't want to experience that anyway." Chloe's smile froze. For a moment, we just looked at each other in silence. Then, footsteps sounded behind us. Instantly, she shifted her expression, turning around with a sweet, gentle look just as Ethan walked through the door. "Ethan, you're home," she said tenderly, her brows softening as she walked over to him and took the bag from his hand, acting like a devoted, graceful wife. They looked perfectly in sync, one handing over, one receiving, so natural, so intimate, that I suddenly felt like the unnecessary one in the room. "Thanks for your hard work today, Emily," Ethan said, glancing at me with a faintly flattering tone, as if trying to ease the tension he sensed. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the bag Chloe was holding. It was the same gift I had once given him when he successfully closed his very first business deal. Suddenly, her so-called obsession with cleanliness struck me as painfully ironic. Since Ethan had come home, I took the chance to speak up. Looking at Chloe leaning against his arm, I pointed casually toward the 4 large boxes beside them. "Ethan doesn't count as an outsider here, right?" I asked with a faint smile. As expected, Chloe's eyes instantly reddened. She turned to tug at Ethan's sleeve, her voice trembling just right. "Ethan, did I cause trouble for you and Emily again?" "No, of course not," he denied quickly, almost instinctively, before glancing at me. "Emily, Chloe's pregnant. Her emotions are unstable. Just try to be a little more understanding, okay?" Understanding? There wasn't a shred of it left in me. The fact that I didn't slap either of them then and there was already the greatest act of restraint I could offer. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs. I had barely gone a few steps before stopping. Looking back at Ethan, I asked calmly, Do you want me to move my things out of the master bedroom? Though Ethan and I had never been married, everyone in the villa knew I was the lady of the house. But now that Chloe had moved in, as his legal wife, everyone seemed confused about their roles. On the very first day she arrived, Chloe had the entire villa redecorated. She spoke with authority, instructing the staff to rearrange furniture and replace decorations as if she'd always lived there. Aunt May, the housekeeper, was furious. She came upstairs to complain to me, asking how we could let her behave that way. I stayed calm and said, "Just let her do whatever she wants. I won't be here much longer anyway." That night, I went online and started looking for a new place to live. But before I moved out, there were still things Ethan and I had to settle. Just thinking about it made me tired. Lately, exhaustion came so easily, I didn't even know why. I rubbed my temples and reassured Aunt May before she left the room. Then I lay down, pulled the blanket over myself, and drifted into a deep sleep. In that sleep, I dreamed of the night Ethan Summers confessed his love to me. He had been drinking, his face flushed but his eyes clear. Nervous, he didn't know what to do with his hands, his voice trembling slightly as he said, "Emily, will you walk through life with me?" He told me he wanted me there through all 4 seasons, for every meal, every day. He said once he'd chosen someone, he would never change. He was clumsy with his words. But even in my dream, I remembered it perfectly. I had lost control that night, threw my arms around him and cried. Then we kissed deeply, a kiss so full of love and sweetness that even in the dream, it felt real. But then, why did it hurt so much? The pain spreading through my body was sharp and relentless, like being pricked by 1,000 needles at once. I opened my eyes and saw Ethan Summers sitting on the edge of my bed, watching me. I flinched in surprise. Ever since he had given Chloe a legal title, he and I had barely interacted. He hadn't even stepped foot into the master bedroom once. So seeing him there now, sitting so close, my first reaction was instinctive caution. I sat up quickly, my eyes cold and guarded. "What are you doing here, Ethan? Did you come to take something?" A shadow flickered across his face but disappeared just as fast. He reached out to take my hand, his voice soft and coaxing. "Emily, what we have doesn't need a piece of paper to prove it." His words made my stomach turn. I jerked my hand free. "You don't need to explain," I said flatly. I got out of bed, keeping my distance from him. But the next second, he suddenly pulled me into his arms from behind. His breath brushed against my neck, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. My skin crawled. Nausea hit me hard and fast. I shoved him away violently, stumbling forward as I gagged and nearly vomited. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan's face twist with shock and anger. He stared at me, jaw clenched. "You're disgusted by me, aren't you?" he demanded. "You should be with Chloe," I said coldly. "She's pregnant and her emotions are unstable. She needs you more than I do." My words made his expression soften again. He stepped closer and gently patted my head like I was a child. "I know," he murmured. "My Emily is the best sister in the world, always understanding, always willing to give in for her little sister. Just be patient for a while, and I'll make it up to you later." My throat tightened. The nausea returned, stronger this time. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I pushed him away again and ran straight into the bathroom, my head spinning. When I came back out, Ethan's expression had darkened, but this time I didn't wait for him to speak. I wiped my mouth, lifted my head, and looked him dead in the eye. "Ethan," I said evenly, "have you ever considered that this reaction of mine might mean something else?" He froze. His pupils contracted in panic and his voice trembled. "No, that's impossible." A strange calm washed over me then. Good, I thought. Now that he's panicking, things will go according to plan. I let out a short, humorless laugh, pressing a hand to my thigh as I slowly stood up. I walked toward him, brushed a speck of lint off his shoulder, and said lightly, "Don't worry. Even if I were pregnant, I wouldn't come looking for you to put the baby under your name." "Emily," he said sharply, irritation creeping into his tone. But as soon as he caught the icy look in my eyes, his expression flickered with something complicated. Regret, maybe, or guilt. His gaze dropped to my stomach, and he hesitated before saying, "I know you resent me, but I promise I'll make it up to you." "Oh, and how exactly do you plan to make it up to me?" I asked calmly. He didn't have an answer, so I gave him one. I suggested that he compensate me with 15% of the company's shares. To my surprise, he agreed, but not without a condition. He wanted me to get a full medical checkup at the hospital. He also hinted that if anything unexpected happened, he hoped I would think of the bigger picture. I smiled faintly and nodded. To put his mind at ease, I cooperated completely and went to the obstetrics department for the examination. I had already made an appointment with someone else. When I walked out of the hospital, a black car was parked by the curb. Its license plate, with a row of 8s in the middle, gleamed under the sun, standing out among the crowd. Behind the wheel sat Julian Reed, waiting for me. When he saw me, it was rare for Julian Reed to step out of his car, but that day he did. His eyes were locked on me the moment I appeared, sharp and probing. The first words out of his mouth were, "Did you get an abortion?" I couldn't stop my eyes from widening. Ignoring the question, I walked past him, opened the passenger door, and got in. I tossed the hospital's plastic bag with the prescribed medicine onto the car's center console. Julian followed and slid into the driver's seat. His gaze flicked to the clear bag and caught the names printed on the bottles inside: Rosebanon and ethinyl estradiol. Hormonal contraceptives. He frowned, his brows pulling together in confusion. I turned my head slightly and saw his eyelid twitch, clearly trying to figure out what was going on. I didn't have the patience to explain, so I simply said, "Don't you want to find somewhere private to talk?" I had reached out to Julian for personal reasons. I'd just received 15% of Ethan Summers' company shares, and I knew Julian Reed had been eyeing Ethan's company for years. Since the day Ethan started his business, he'd always had competitors, but none as powerful as Julian. Working with him was strategically my best move. We met later at a quiet cafe. 15% of the shares, I said plainly. Sell them to me, he repeated, tilting his head. Ethan Summers and I run competing companies. Why would I buy into his business? What am I supposed to do? Collect companies for fun? He clearly hadn't expected me to be so straightforward. As he skimmed through the documents I'd handed him, his usual mocking expression was replaced by rare surprise. It only lasted a second before he leaned back in his chair, resting his chin on one hand, his lips curling into a small, curious smile. "As a rival of your company," I said calmly, "I only want to destroy my competitor." I spoke without a hint of hesitation. "I know you've been wanting to acquire Ethan's company," I added. Julian's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, the glint in them dangerous. But I remained steady, my tone even. "I can help you," I said, "but when it's done, I want a 20% investment stake in return." The silence that followed was heavy enough to hear a pin drop. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its teasing edge. "Do you even know what you're doing?" He lowered his arm, resting one hand over the other, his thumb absently brushing the silver ring on his index finger. Whether unconsciously or deliberately, I couldn't tell. His eyes never left me, studying me with quiet intensity. I didn't flinch. My posture stayed composed, my expression calm. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said firmly. "I'm stabbing Ethan Summers in the back," and I admitted openly. A faint smile tugged at my lips. "In fact, I'm looking forward to the day it succeeds." At that, Julian stood up. His tall frame cast a shadow over the table as he approached me, the air around him charged with authority. My shoulders stiffened when his hands came down gently but firmly, gripping them. My heartbeat quickened. It had been years since I'd been this close to a man, any man other than Ethan. And Julian Reed, standing this near, carried a completely different kind of presence. His cologne was stronger, deeper, nothing like Ethan's. The scent made my chest tighten, my breath quicken, my thoughts scatter for just a moment. Then I heard his voice, low and deliberate. I looked up, startled, meeting his dark, steady gaze. What shocked me even more was what came next. He agreed. His answer was clear and immediate, his expression calm, unreadable. For a second, I couldn't tell what he was thinking, but it didn't matter. My first step had succeeded. "Don't worry, Mr. Reed," I said with a practiced, composed smile. "I won't let you take a loss on this deal." I reached around him, picked up my cup, and lifted it slightly toward him in a silent toast before taking a sip. Then, as smoothly as possible, I added, "Now we can move on to the next step." I tilted my chin toward the empty seat across from us, hinting that we should sit back down. But Julian Reed didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was, his tall figure still leaning over me, close enough to blur the line of personal space. He even leaned down closer intentionally. My face grew hot, and for a moment, staring up at Julian Reed's unwavering posture, I felt a strange mix of fluster and helplessness. Julian was undeniably attractive. His features were sharp and bright, the kind that made it obvious he'd never known hardship. His brows were strong, his eyes intense, a confidence and authority that contrasted completely with Ethan Summers' quiet, inward charm. Julian's beauty wasn't gentle. It was commanding, magnetic, and almost impossible to resist. I instinctively took a step back, my eyes fixed on the man in front of me. Just when my composure was about to shatter, a cool breeze slipped between us. The shadow looming over me disappeared as he straightened. "All right," he said casually, "but I want you to promise me one thing." As he spoke, Julian returned to his seat opposite me. He didn't even glance at me again, just signed the document with a few swift strokes, pressed it down with 2 fingers, and slid it across the table. His eyes burned with intensity as he looked up. "When this is over," he said slowly, "I want you to become my personal assistant." I froze. I never considered myself exceptional. In fact, I was fully aware that people would soon label me as a traitor, someone who stabbed her own in the back. I was already bracing myself for the day I'd be blacklisted. And yet, Julian Reed of all people was asking me to be his assistant? I didn't understand him at all. When I returned to the villa, my mind was a tangled mess. But the moment I stepped inside, I stopped dead in my tracks. My belongings, every last piece, had been thrown out into the yard, scattered everywhere. My pupils constricted, and I stood frozen for several seconds. Then one of the maids, seeing me, rushed over in panic. "Miss Emily, Mr. and Mrs. Cole just arrived," she said breathlessly. "They ordered us to move your things out. We couldn't stop them." Her face was full of guilt and worry. When I didn't respond, she grew even more flustered. I stared quietly at the mess before me. In truth, when I left the Cole family years ago, I didn't take much with me. Later, when Ethan and I moved from that cramped 5-square-meter rental room to this 100-square-meter villa, I had gradually started collecting a few things of my own. Small pieces of a life I built myself, like the shattered wind chime lying on the ground. It was the first thing I ever bought with money from my part-time job. Or the dirty teddy bear tossed to the side. That was the one Ethan Summers had won for me on our very first date. And those broken glass bottles scattered everywhere. Those were the jars we collected together during our trips. Little mementos from places we'd been. They were pieces of my memories. The life I'd built after leaving the Coles. And now, they were nothing but trash on the ground. My fists clenched tightly. My chest rose and fell violently, my vision tinting red. The world buzzed in my ears, even the maid's anxious voice faded into static. That was when Chloe came out, her hand resting on her small baby bump. She looked at me standing before the wreckage with that same smugness she could never quite hide. Then, pretending to be worried, she walked toward me. "Sister, are you okay?" she asked sweetly. "Dad and Mom said it's inconvenient for you to stay here now, so they helped move your things out and arranged another place for you." Slap. My left hand flew before I even realized it. The sharp crack echoed through the yard. In that instant, the weight pressing on my chest for days finally shattered. I felt free, clean, almost relieved. Still, I was generous enough to use my other hand to catch Chloe's arm, stopping her from falling. Everyone around us went silent, stunned. Even Chloe herself stared at me, wide-eyed, unable to react. From the very beginning of this story, I had always gone with the flow. Even when she moved into the villa, I hadn't resisted. I had stayed quiet, calm, unbothered, like still water. But now, the calm, stagnant water inside me finally broke into waves. I was no longer still. I had stirred up the entire surface. "Aunt May, please clean up everything on the ground," I said, ignoring Chloe's shocked, disbelieving stare as I gave the order. While I was speaking to Aunt May, the Coles, my father and stepmother, finally heard the commotion and came out of the house. They looked from me to Chloe, confusion flickering in their eyes. Then Chloe began to cry. "Dad, Mom," she hit me. She sobbed. Of course she tattled. I wasn't surprised. The moment my father and stepmother saw her crying, they rushed to her side in a panic, shielding her protectively as if I were some intruder, and glared at me with outrage. I, however, felt completely calm. You want me gone, I said evenly, but did you even bother to check whose name is on the deed to this house? You threw out the owner's belongings without permission. So, Chloe, are you going to apologize, or should I call the police? You decide. Before anyone could speak, I'd already seized control of the situation. Chloe's sobs cut off abruptly. My father and stepmother's faces drained of color. This chaos quickly reached Ethan Summers. When he came home to the villa, Chloe immediately began crying again. Ethan, she whimpered, she tried to kick me out. Ethan's expression darkened. He looked at me, disappointment clouding his eyes. The first thing he said was, Emily, I thought you were more understanding than this. Understanding? I repeated, a bitter laugh tugging at the corner of my mouth. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Even now, he still saw me as something he owned, something expected to obey without question. I shrugged, gesturing toward the wreckage scattered across the yard. If being understanding means letting your wife live comfortably in my house, then sure, show me how. Ethan blinked, momentarily stunned. He seemed to forget that while he'd paid for this place, it was my name printed clearly on the deed. Back then, he'd told me he wanted to give me a sense of absolute security, to make up for the childhood I spent living off others, always feeling like I didn't belong. When I first held those property papers in my hands, I had been deeply moved. It wasn't about the villa itself, it was about him. About Ethan, who once gave me all his attention, whose eyes back then were clear, gentle, and full of sincerity. He had held my hand and promised me that he'd give me everything he could, that I'd never regret choosing to walk beside him. The Ethan Summers of 25 truly loved me, and I loved him just as much. But now, looking at the man standing before me, still handsome, now tempered by years of maturity, I knew there was no going back. Not ever. Emily, he said softly, I know you're upset because Chloe moved your things without telling you. I'll make it up to you, I promise. For now, you can stay at a hotel until everything calms down. He glanced at the mess in the yard, then back at my cold face. Realizing his words had only made things worse, he stepped forward, reaching out to take my hand in reassurance. I pulled away before he could touch me and walked straight upstairs. In my study, I opened the safe and took out the house deed. Then I went back down to where Chloe stood, still being shielded by my father and stepmother. Opening the document, I said clearly, This is my house. You're the one who needs to leave. Chloe, who had always been protected and pampered, clearly wasn't used to anyone confronting her like this. Seeing the document in my hand, she turned pale, her eyes instantly filling with tears. Then she clutched her belly and began crying out pitifully. Emily, she's your sister, my father snapped, his voice heavy with reproach. Do you really have to make such a scene? And just like that, his sympathy, like always, wasn't for me. It was for her. Emily, Chloe's pregnant, my father began, his tone suddenly turning weary. For the sake of the years you lived under this roof, can't you let this go? Your stepmother always treated you well, didn't she? Just give your sister a little leeway. Pregnant women shouldn't be put under stress. My stepmother's face softened into practiced gentleness. Emily, she said, sighing, can't you stop making things difficult? Ethan Summers was starting to lose patience, but I stayed calm. Holding the house deed in one hand, I pointed at Chloe. If you don't want to be thrown out, I said coldly, then apologize to me. Chloe's face went pale, she bit her lip, her eyes full of resentment. But I didn't care. When she still hesitated, I turned toward the security intercom, ready to call the guards to escort them out. Before I could, her voice broke through the silence. Fine. I'm sorry, okay? It's my fault, I should have known my place. Her apology was laced with grievance, so thick it nearly dripped. Even my father and Ethan looked at me with disappointment. My father glared and hissed, Heartless girl, how could you treat your own sister this way? I smiled faintly, my voice cold. If it hurts you so much to see your little daughter suffer, then take her back to live with you. That shut him up. A few years ago, my father went bankrupt. His 500-square-meter villa had been auctioned off, and now he and my stepmother lived cramped together in a one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. There was no place left for Chloe in his world anymore. At that moment, Aunt May had already begun gathering my scattered belongings, instructing the other staff to carry everything back inside. No, I said quickly, stopping her. Leave it. I don't want any of it. Aunt May froze, glancing around helplessly. Miss Emily, some of these things are your treasures. You never even let us touch them when we cleaned. I shook my head, cutting her off. It's fine, the old must go before the new can come. But Ethan's expression darkened further. I could tell my words had hit him somewhere deep, but what did that matter to me anymore? A moment later, his phone rang. After a short conversation, he left in a rush. Chloe, worn out from her earlier dramatics, stayed quiet for the rest of the evening, but peace lasted only one night. Just before dawn, the villa's lights suddenly blazed on. Aunt May ran upstairs and banged on my door, breathless. Miss Emily. She's having terrible stomach pains. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived and took Chloe to the hospital. I didn't go with her. I simply sent a brief message to Ethan to inform him. He didn't come home for the next few days. I wasn't surprised. Meanwhile, Aunt May kept muttering under her breath, furious on my behalf. That girl's like a cuckoo taking over another's nest, she said. What kind of sister steals her own sister's fiancé? In the old days, she would have been scolded until she drowned in spit. I gave a quiet, humorless laugh. But now, online, everyone says their love is stronger than stone. And I wasn't exaggerating. The very next day after Chloe was admitted to the hospital, the news exploded across social media. Wife of rising tech CEO Ethan Summers confirmed pregnant. Genius entrepreneur Ethan Summers and his beloved wife love stronger than ever. The most handsome CEO and the most beautiful expectant mother, perfect couple of the year. The headlines were blinding. Clicking through, the articles were full of glowing text and sweet photos, painting a vivid picture of Ethan and Chloe's so-called pure, destined love story. They wrote that when they were young, he was her childhood sweetheart. That when tragedy struck, when her family's company went bankrupt, still, according to the article, in order to be worthy of the woman he loved, Ethan Summers had worked tirelessly, building his own company from nothing, until he finally succeeded and brought his beloved home as his bride. A perfect happy ending, wasn't it? Truly applause-worthy. The photos matched the narrative beautifully. Ethan sitting beside Chloe's hospital bed, carefully peeling an orange for her. His gaze was gentle, full of tenderness. Her smile, soft and serene. Just one glance at those pictures and anyone's imagination could run wild. I closed the tablet expressionlessly, exiting the news page. Right then, a WeChat notification popped up. The message read, "If you're angry right now, stay that way. Anger keeps people sharp." It was from Julian Reed. His words, as usual, carried that same infuriating smugness, followed by a ridiculous smirking emoji. I didn't find it funny in the slightest. My fingers moved over the keyboard. And what does a sharp person usually do next? I typed back. He must have been thinking, because the typing indicator stayed on for a long while. Then, a short reply appeared. "Play him." My eyebrows lifted. My fingertips hovered midair for a moment. Then slowly, the corner of my lips curved up. Within just a few days, Ethan and Chloe had ridden the wave of online fame. Their love story was trending across every platform, drawing endless blessings and envy. Even the company's orders had skyrocketed. But it didn't last long. Soon, everything flipped. It all started with a leaked audio recording from inside the company. "So much for love stronger than stone," a man's voice said. The real girlfriend of CEO Ethan Summers was his secretary, Emily Cole. She's been with him since the very beginning of his startup. And what did he do? He got rich and traded her in for someone else. "She worked by his side for 8 years, another voice added. "That villa everyone keeps praising? It's under her name. We all thought they were about to get married. We never dared to talk about it publicly, but deep down, we all felt bad for her. She's a good woman." Several more voices chimed in, echoing the same story. The recording spread online like wildfire, sparking heated debate. Some people insisted they were fake, while others said rumors like that didn't just appear out of nowhere. A few even started attacking me, claiming I was no innocent victim. And in a sense, they weren't entirely wrong. Yes, I had been with Ethan Summers since the very start of his company. But what people didn't understand was that our relationship had always been complicated, blurred between business and love. When someone leaked that the secretary Emily in question was me, and that I was still living in Ethan's villa, public outrage exploded. It wasn't illegal, of course, but in the ruthless world of public opinion, morality scandals could destroy a company faster than any lawsuit, especially in the internet age, where even the smallest ripple could become a tidal wave. And Ethan, burdened by guilt, came looking for me before things reached their peak. "Emily," he said, gripping my hand tightly, his expression earnest. "The company is our shared effort. I know you won't just stand by and watch it all go to waste." I pulled my hand free, my tone calm and detached. "I'm on vacation, remember?" He froze, but I didn't give him time to speak. "This was your decision," I said flatly. "The day Chloe moved into the villa, you suspended all my duties. You said it was for my own good, to help me relax and avoid gossip, to protect me from being talked about behind my back." My voice didn't waver, though every word tasted bitter. "But now, you're here asking me to help clean up your mess?" "Emily," he started, but the name came out like a plea. I cut him off, meeting his eyes without emotion. "What exactly do you want me to do?" At that, his expression softened, almost with relief. "I knew you'd understand," he said with a faint, hopeful smile. "You've always cared about the bigger picture." Even now, he was still so sure of me, so certain that I still loved him. After all, ever since Chloe had moved into the villa, although I had kept my distance, I had never once said I wanted to draw a line between us, or move out of the villa. Ethan Summers was confident, perhaps too confident. He truly believed I would keep waiting for him, faithfully, just as I always had. Looking at that self-assured smile on his face, I suddenly found it absurd to the point of laughter. The image that popped into my head was of a woman picking wild herbs to survive after her husband abandoned her. Was that what he thought of me? That after 8 years of love, I'd be content living on scraps? "Emily," he said earnestly, "this whole thing could be cleared up easily if you just came forward. Say a few words, clarify that our relationship has only ever been professional, that we've always been just boss and secretary. You lived in the villa purely to help take care of your sister. People online are fickle. Give it a week or two, and they'll move on to the next scandal. No one will keep holding on to this." Ethan sounded so sure, as though he'd already convinced himself this plan was reasonable. I listened silently, not bothering to interrupt. Maybe my expression was too calm because a faint flicker of guilt crossed his eyes. He opened his mouth, probably to justify himself further. But before he could, I smiled faintly and said, "All right, I'll do it." My agreement seemed to surprise him, and it definitely made Chloe think I was weak. That night at dinner, she made sure to put on a show. Holding her belly, she sat at the table, picking at the food Aunt May had prepared. "Aunt May," she said with mock gentleness, "are you sure this food is safe for me to eat? I'm in a special condition right now, you know. If you're not sure who you're supposed to be taking care of, maybe you shouldn't work here anymore." Her tone was soft, but her arrogance was unmistakable. I sat at the other end of the table, watching her smug face, and suddenly lost my appetite. It was such a shame. Aunt May had worked all afternoon to prepare the meal, and now it was ruined by this little performance. Lowering my head, I quietly ladled myself some soup, hoping to stay out of it. But Chloe, like a relentless flea, refused to stop jumping. "It's too sweet," she said sharply. "Don't you know pregnant women shouldn't eat sweet food? What if I get gestational diabetes? Aunt May, are you trying to harm my baby, or is someone putting you up to it?" With each word, her voice grew shriller. Finally, she threw her spoon aside, sending food clattering across the table. Aunt May had endured enough that day. Hearing those accusations, she snapped. "Miss Chloe," she said, her voice trembling with anger, "we've been cooking the same way we always have. It's never been a problem before. Why is it that ever since you arrived, nothing is good enough? If you're so unhappy, you can hire your own personal chef to cook for you." Her words made Chloe's face turn as pale as paper. She stood frozen, her eyes darting between Aunt May and me. Then she clutched her stomach and began crying out in pain. I hadn't even said a word. My spoon was still in my hand when hurried footsteps echoed from the doorway. Moments later, Ethan rushed in like a knight charging to rescue his damsel, wrapping his arms protectively around Chloe. The picture they made together, him holding her, her trembling against his chest, was almost poetic in its irony. Suddenly, the soup in my mouth tasted like water, flat, flavorless. I set my spoon down and looked at them quietly. I didn't say anything, but something in my expression, cold, distant, made Ethan, who had been about to lecture me, stop mid-sentence. "Ethan," Chloe whimpered, pressing closer to him. "I can't stay here anymore. Everyone here is on her side. Even this villa, it's under her name. I feel like a stranger in my own home." Her words made Aunt May's face twist with frustration. "Miss Chloe," she blurted out, "you may be a guest, but none of us have ever treated you poorly." "Enough, Aunt May." Ethan's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a whip. The old woman froze, shocked. Then he turned back to me, his eyes full of conflict, guilt, confusion, maybe even pity. And I couldn't help it. I laughed. Quietly, bitterly, because what else was there left to do? Ethan Summers looked like he wanted to say or do something, but hesitation flickered across his face. Was he struggling with his conscience? Or did he simply think that by showing a bit of inner conflict, he might look like less of a bastard? I watched him calmly as he slowly released Chloe, his hand lingering on her shoulder before letting go, like someone trying to prove to himself that he was doing the right thing. Then he turned and walked toward me. Without a word, I took a stack of documents from my bag and placed them on the table in front of me. His eyes flicked down to the papers, and from the way his expression softened, I already knew what he wanted. "Emily," he began carefully. "After giving it a lot of thought, I think it's best if you move out for now. We can transfer the villa under my name, and later, we'll figure out what to do next." He said it as if it were a discussion, but everything was already arranged. The documents were complete, just waiting for my signature. I lowered my gaze to the black and white print, then looked up again, meeting his gentle, affectionate eyes. He'd even thoughtfully placed a pen on top of the papers for me. Nodding slightly, I smiled at him. His face relaxed, relief washing over him, until I pushed the folder back across the table. "If we're transferring the property?" I said coolly. "Let's be clear about the price. Payment first, signature later." For a moment, Ethan's expression froze. It was as if he hadn't expected me to be so direct. But before he could gather his thoughts, I added, "I want cash." From the corner of my eye, I caught Chloe's stunned face, her mouth parted in disbelief. And to her surprise, maybe even to mine, Ethan agreed. He called his lawyer and assistant, arranging for the full payment to be delivered that same evening. As the process unfolded, Chloe's face went from green to white over and over. She watched, trembling with fury as the final bag of cash was loaded into my car. Then, unable to hold it in any longer, she sneered. "I always thought you stayed with Ethan for love," she said. "Guess I was wrong." Her words made Ethan's jaw tighten. The night around us felt heavy, the air thick with tension. From the moment I'd demanded my shares to the moment I'd asked for cash, he must have sensed something was off, like I was deliberately drawing the line between us, cutting every last tie. Once, when Chloe threw my things into the yard, I'd fought back to defend my right to this villa. But now, with him buying it back from me in cash, it really was over. No more debts, no more connections. "Emily," he said, his voice low as he stepped closer, grabbing my hand. "I just need you to cooperate with me for the company's sake. Don't you trust me?" His eyes flicked toward Chloe, then back to me, searching, pleading, almost desperate. I tilted my head slightly, my face half hidden in the silver wash of moonlight. "This is all just an act, isn't it? So tell me, do you trust me?" That question shut him up instantly. "Emily," he said finally, his voice soft again, "if I didn't trust you, I wouldn't have given you the shares or the money. I just want you to feel secure." His words were so gentle, it almost sounded like love. "Well," I replied, smiling faintly, "I feel very secure now." I gave the roof of the car a light tap. Our eyes met, and for the first time that night I smiled genuinely. After all, the best way to know if a man truly loves you isn't by listening to what he says, but by watching what he does. I didn't lower my voice. I wanted Chloe to hear every word. Her face turned ghostly pale, and a wicked amusement bloomed inside me. Deliberately, I reached out, patted Ethan's cheek lightly, and flashed him a bright, careless grin. "So don't worry," I said lightly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Whatever I said seemed to put Ethan Summers at ease. Surprise flickered across his face, and that only made my smile widen. I pulled my hand free and called out, "Aunt May." Yes, Miss Emily, she answered quickly. If Miss Chloe isn't satisfied with your care, I continued, then you'll come with me. Yes, ma'am, Aunt May replied without a hint of hesitation. She had been suppressing her anger for a long time, and the moment I spoke, she didn't even bother packing. She just stormed toward the car, heels clicking against the driveway. After settling into the passenger seat, she even tilted her chin proudly and shot Chloe a triumphant look through the window. Her defiance sparked a ripple among the staff. From inside and outside the villa, people began whispering eagerly. Is Miss Emily hiring new security? Someone joked. What about housekeepers? Another chimed in. Better to work for someone you know than start over. Even the driver joined in, grinning. Miss Emily, I'll take you wherever you need to go, and I won't be coming back. Don't tell me Mr. Summers can't spare this beat-up car for you. And that's how, when I left the villa, I didn't go alone. I took the driver, the housekeeper, the security guard, and Aunt May. What Ethan didn't know was that before making my final decision, I'd already asked Julian Reed to help me purchase a new villa nearby. When our small crew arrived, Julian was already there, standing tall under the soft glow of the porch light, looking effortlessly composed. Aunt May leaned closer and whispered, half teasing, Miss Emily, you've got quite the taste in men. I didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. After giving a few quick instructions for the servants to carry my luggage inside, I walked over to Julian, arching an eyebrow. Mr. Reed, your timing's impressive, I teased. He smiled lazily, hands in his pockets, that usual air of nonchalance surrounding him. His gaze flicked past me, amused at the scene of people unloading behind us. I heard you were moving here tonight, he said. I thought maybe you'd need my help. But looking at this, I guess I'm the one who should be asking for help. He rubbed the bridge of his nose dramatically, pretending to look troubled. I couldn't help but chuckle. Thank you, Julian. Really, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have had anywhere to go tonight with this entourage. I meant it. My leaving had been decided long ago, but tonight's events had happened so suddenly that I barely had time to think. Without Julian's quick actions, I would have had nowhere to land. As I looked at him, his sharp, steady features softened by the moonlight, I felt a rare warmth of gratitude. We may just be business partners, I said sincerely, but I do appreciate your help. Something in my words seemed to catch him off guard. For once, the man known for his teasing smirk looked genuinely unsettled. He straightened instinctively, his tall frame casting a shadow that stretched across the pavement. The silver light highlighted the deep lines of his face, making his eyes seem darker, more unreadable. There's no need to thank me, he said, his low voice rougher than usual. That tone, it was calm, but it made my throat dry and my cheeks burn. I looked away, forcing a polite smile. It's getting late. Once everything settles, I'll invite you over properly for a housewarming dinner. The words came out smooth, distant, intentionally formal. Julian wasn't a fool. He knew I was politely sending him off. But instead of leaving, he looked down at me, his height giving him a quiet, undeniable dominance. The glow from the porch lights haloed his figure, and for a moment, my heart skipped a beat. Julian and Ethan were different in every imaginable way. Maybe it was the way they were built, their natures, their temperaments. Ethan had been shaped by hardship, cautious and reserved, sometimes even brooding. His world was one of control, calculation, and quiet shadows. Julian, on the other hand, had always moved through life with ease. Success had come naturally to him, and it showed, in the confidence of his stance, in the unguarded directness of his eyes, in the brightness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. I was no longer the naive girl I once was. I could sense what he was thinking. And maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was starting to feel too. But I didn't want to think too deeply about it. Whether it was exhaustion or fear, it didn't matter anymore. I just didn't want to feel that kind of emotion again. I kept a polite smile, meeting Julian Reed's eyes with a calm, distant look. Eventually, something in his expression shifted. His gaze lowered, and for the first time he seemed a little frustrated, almost wounded. He stepped closer, brushing past me, and muttered under his breath, "Heartless woman. Use a man, then toss him aside." A cool breeze swept past, brushing against my face and tugging gently at my heart. I pretended not to hear. Moments later, Julian's car disappeared into the darkness. I stayed standing by the doorway, lost in thought, until Aunt May came up beside me. "Miss Emily?" she said curiously. "That man just now, was he your new friend?" I turned to look at her. Her face was practically glowing with excitement, her eyes wide and eager. If she'd had a sign on her forehead that said gossip, it couldn't have been more obvious. I couldn't help but laugh softly. "My new boss," I said evenly, turning my gaze back toward the night sky. Meanwhile, Ethan Summers had gone all out. He invited every major media outlet in the city and hosted a grand press conference, lavish, elegant, and thoroughly choreographed. That day I was invited to attend as one of the involved parties. The moment I appeared, the room erupted. Reporters swarmed toward me, shouting over one another, microphones and cameras thrust into my face. Despite the security guards struggling to hold them back, chaos filled the air. "Everyone," I heard Ethan's calm voice rise over the noise, "the reason I've gathered you here today is to clarify the baseless rumors that have been circulating recently. I'll answer your questions one by one." When I looked up, Ethan stood under the bright lights, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit and polished shoes. He moved gracefully, helping Chloe sit down like a devoted husband tending to his pregnant wife. Facing the flashing cameras, his demeanor was flawless, gentle, poised, composed. "Please give Miss Emily Cole some space," he said with a courteous smile. And at his words, the reporters reluctantly stepped aside to make room for me. I walked forward slowly, and as my eyes moved across the stage, I froze for a split second. It wasn't just Ethan and Chloe sitting there. My father and stepmother were there, too. A faint, bitter laugh escaped my lips. The four of them sitting in a neat line, it almost looked like a perfect little family portrait. And then there was me, standing before them, with one empty chair beside them. That single vacant seat somehow made me feel even more redundant, an unnecessary presence, just like I'd always been in the Cole family. When I lived with them, the three of them, my father, stepmother, and Chloe, always had matching sets of everything. Matching cups, matching dishes, matching cutlery. Mine was always an extra, a mismatched addition placed at the end of the table, a guest in my own home. After I left that house and moved in with Ethan, I'd bought my own matching dining sets and filled our cupboards neatly, all in one uniform color. He used to tease me about it, asking if I had some kind of obsessive-compulsive disorder. "Why only one color?" he'd said, laughing. I never explained. Maybe, deep down, all I ever wanted was a sense of belonging, a warm, ordinary family of my own. But that kind of warmth had never been meant for me. By the time I collected myself, I was already sitting in my assigned seat. Ethan didn't waste time. With his usual smooth tone, he began his prepared statement, addressing the rumors circulating online. He explained the nature of my relationship with the Cole family, with Chloe, and with himself. According to Ethan, the Coles and the Summers had always shared a close bond. When his company was just starting out and faced financial hardship, my father had generously provided him with early funding and mentorship. Later, my father had even arranged for me to intern at his company to gain experience. "Miss Emily Cole and I are the same age," Ethan said easily, turning toward the cameras with his signature, charming smile. "We're both young professionals, bright, ambitious, and talented, working together under the same roof. After all these years and there's still no progress between the two of you?" One reporter asked sharply, his tone full of implication. The way they looked at me and Ethan Summers was anything but innocent. Of course, it made sense. Over the years, we'd kept our relationship quiet at work, never officially acknowledging it, but never making an effort to hide it either. "Mr. Summers," another reporter pressed, "everyone in your company says that your secretary, Miss Cole, is your wife. They say she's been by your side since the very beginning of your career. Are you saying your relationship has only ever been professional?" Someone else chimed in. "Compared to Miss Cole, who's been working closely with you day and night for years, your wife, her younger sister, was overseas all that time. And now she's suddenly back, and the two of you got married almost instantly. Isn't that a little suspicious?" Each question hit harder than the last. I could see the color draining from Ethan's face. His expression grew darker, more strained, and his eyes flickered toward me repeatedly, as if begging me to step in and save him. I narrowed my eyes slightly. I understood exactly what he wanted, But there was nothing he could do to control this situation now. After all, for years I had been the one standing next to him at press conferences, managing the chaos, keeping his image spotless. So this time I decided to speak. I cleared my throat and said slowly, "Everyone, regarding my relationship with Mr. Summers, I'd like to take this opportunity to clarify a few things." The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of every camera, every gaze fixed on me. "Of course," I continued, "my relationship with him isn't just one between a boss and his secretary." The collective gasp that followed was loud and immediate. I didn't need to look to know that Ethan's glare was burning into me, but I didn't care. I stood up calmly, facing the sea of flashing lights and curious eyes. My voice was steady as I said the next words. "Mr. Summers is also my brother-in-law." The air shifted instantly. Murmurs spread like wildfire, rippling through the crowd. No one had expected that answer. After a few stunned seconds, a reporter shouted, "But isn't that obvious? Mr. Summers is married to Miss Chloe Cole." At that, the whispers turned into an uproar. "Sure, she's the sister-in-law now," someone said from the crowd. "But what about before the marriage?" "They've been together for years," another voice chimed in. "You're telling me there was nothing between them?" "I bet Mr. Summers took both sisters for himself," a man sneered. "The older one runs the company, and the younger one runs the household. Talk about efficient management." The laughter that followed was ugly and cruel. I watched as Ethan's jaw clenched tighter with each word. If it hadn't been a public event, I knew he would have stormed over and accused me of wasting everyone's time with nonsense. But in front of the cameras, he could only swallow his anger. Taking a deep breath, he forced a strained smile and said, "I want to make one thing clear. I deeply appreciate all the years of hard work and dedication that Miss Cole has given to the company. I've always valued her professionalism and commitment. But now we are one family, and as a family, we support one another. As for these baseless rumors," he added with polished composure, "I hope everyone here will remain rational and not jump to conclusions." He said it with such confidence, such moral superiority, that I almost wanted to laugh. Instead, I smiled faintly and kept my silence, though the taste in my mouth was bitter. That's when my father stood up. After briefly calming the crowd, he spoke in a low, measured tone. "I've always trusted in Ethan's character," he said. "That's why I had no hesitation letting my eldest daughter work by his side to learn from him. As for emotional matters, all I can say is that Ethan has always been loyal and devoted. He and Chloe grew up together as childhood sweethearts. Even after being apart for several years, their bond remained unshakable." I gripped the fabric of my dress tightly, the sound of my father's voice pounding in my ears. Hearing his calm, affectionate defense, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So my father could be a loving, protective parent, just not to me. All his care, all his loyalty, was reserved for Chloe. My throat tightened painfully as I listened to the duet between Ethan and my father, one speaking, the other backing him up perfectly, each word cutting deeper than the last. And then, at that exact moment, from the crowd beneath the stage came a sharp, mocking laugh. "Devoted and consistent, huh? Then how do you explain these photos?" the reporter sneered. "Mr. Summers and his secretary, always side by side, always together. And according to her college professors and classmates, Emily Cole wasn't just his secretary. She was his girlfriend." The man held up a stack of glossy photographs and began passing them to the reporters on either side. As they spread through the room, faces shifted one by one, shock, disbelief, and then disgust. Every camera turned toward Ethan Summers, and for the first time he looked rattled. A female reporter slammed one of the photos down on the table in front of him. "Just by looking at these," she said sharply, "are you still claiming that your relationship with Miss Cole was purely professional?" I didn't need to see the photo to know which one it was. The night I'd helped Ethan home after a business banquet, he'd been too drunk to walk, and I'd supported his weight as we left. His arm had rested naturally around my waist, but under the dim light, it looked far more intimate than it really was. Ethan's face had gone pale. The reporter pressed harder, her voice cutting like a blade. "So what's the truth, Mr. Summers? Are you using the excuse of a professional relationship while secretly being involved with both Cole sisters at once? One foot on each boat, as they say?" The room fell silent except for the clicks of cameras. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Ethan sat frozen under the heat of the spotlight, while the Coles, my father, stepmother, and Chloe, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even they couldn't hide their unease. And then the question turned on me. "Miss Emily Cole," one reporter called out, "you've never publicly clarified your relationship with Mr. Summers. So tell us, were the two of you ever actually together?" A perfect surgical strike. I stayed quiet for a long moment, feeling dozens of lenses trained on me. The air seemed to buzz with anticipation. Then at last I said softly, "Not exactly." The phrasing was deliberate, vague enough to sting, but impossible to attack. The word exactly hung in the air like a spark. The reporters exchanged quick glances, and I could see the shift in their expressions. Curiosity turning into suspicion. One of them immediately followed up. "If you weren't together, then why was Miss Cole's name listed on the ownership documents of Mr. Summers' villa?" They were talking about the property I had just signed over days earlier. Ethan straightened instantly, his confidence snapping back like armor. "That's nonsense," he said firmly, his voice low and controlled. Right on cue, Chloe joined in, her tone sweet and innocent. "My sister was only temporarily staying at Ethan's villa. I believe in my heart that Ethan's feelings have always been for me, and me alone." I glanced at her. She was looking at Ethan with soft, trusting eyes, her hand resting over her stomach in that familiar, delicate gesture. I caught the faintest tightening in his brow. Even the reporters could sense the tension between them. "So, Miss Chloe," one of them said, voice laced with irony, "you believe Mr. Summers is devoted to you. But what about your sister? Her feelings for him seem different, don't they?" Just as I'd expected, they'd taken the bait. Chloe widened her eyes, feigning shock. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," she gasped, covering her mouth as if horrified by her own words. Then she turned to me, eyes glistening. "Emily, I didn't mean to imply anything, I swear." Her performance was perfect, delicate, trembling, pitiful. I looked at her coldly. Perhaps it was that very indifference that made her falter, her expression tightening ever so slightly. Her eyes reddened, filling with tears that glimmered under the lights. "But Emily," she whispered, voice breaking, "if you don't clarify things right now, people will keep misunderstanding Ethan." I had to admit it. This was something I could never do. I couldn't cry on cue, couldn't put on the act of a fragile woman about to break, the kind that made men instinctively want to protect her. Her pitiful demeanor only made the crowd more sympathetic to her. Reporters began glancing between us, uncertainty clouding their faces. But not all of them were convinced. The same female journalist who'd confronted Ethan earlier gave a short, cold laugh. "That's a touching story, Miss Chloe," she said, "but unfortunately, your words don't match the facts." She pulled out another folder of documents. "According to our sources, Mr. Summers' legal team recently finalized the transfer of the villa's ownership, which would actually make you, Miss Chloe, the temporary resident, not your sister." The room stirred again. "And another thing," the reporter continued, relentless, "you're only 3 months pregnant. You registered your marriage just a month ago. It's pretty obvious what happened here, isn't it? You used that pregnancy to secure your position." Her voice rose over the murmurs in the room. "Because from the very beginning, since the day Mr. Summers founded his company, Miss Cole has always been by Mr. Summers' side," the reporter continued sharply. "And yet, Miss Chloe only returned to the country earlier this year, and not long after that, she became his legal wife." The words hit their mark. Chloe's face flushed an angry crimson, her expression twisting between humiliation and fury. I couldn't help it. A small, ironic smile tugged at my lips. These reporters were brutal, but effective. If the situation weren't so absurd, I might have applauded. They were practically doing my job for me. With them around, I didn't even need to lift a finger today. But as the murmurs and judgmental whispers around the room grew louder, Chloe finally seemed to crack. She clutched her chest, her breathing uneven, her face pale beneath the harsh lights. Then, as if steeling herself, she pulled something out of her purse, a thin, worn notebook. "This," she announced tremulously, "is my sister's diary." In it, she confessed that she had fallen in love with Ethan since she was 18 years old. It was an unrequited love that lasted for years. For a split second, I froze. My gaze fell on the diary in her hands, and my stomach dropped. The notebook looked cheap and worn. The tulip printed on its cover had faded almost completely. But I recognized it instantly. It was mine. March 22nd, sunny. I just learned his name today, Ethan Summers. I barely know anything about him, except that every time he comes to see Dad, it's about work. But if I could help him somehow, maybe he'd remember me more clearly. April 8th, rainy. I helped Ethan fend off a competitor today, and Dad scolded me for it. But maybe next time when he visits, I'll have a chance to talk to him more. May 21st, sunny. Ethan brought me a gift, a bottle of Air of Switzerland. It's so strange and sweet, even better than the diamond necklace he gave my sister. Chloe's voice rang clear through the microphone as she read my most private thoughts aloud, every line slicing open a wound I thought had long scarred over. My body went numb, my mind buzzed with a dull roar like I was underwater. The sound of the reporters, the flashes of the cameras, it all blurred into a faint, distant hum. Then came the fire. Hot, raw anger surged up from somewhere deep in my chest. And before I even realized what I was doing, I was on my feet. In an instant, I stormed across the stage, snatched the diary from Chloe's hands, and struck her across the face with all the force my trembling hand could muster. "You stole my diary, Chloe," I shouted, my voice shaking. Even Ethan, standing beside her, looked startled. He had always believed that our feelings began during the years we worked side by side, that something gradual had grown between us, but the truth was that I had loved him long before that, quietly, foolishly, and in secret. I had buried that part of myself, the naive, starry-eyed girl who wrote those pages when the diary went missing. And now, that most private, innocent part of me had been ripped open and paraded before the world. Under Ethan's betrayal, it all felt like a cruel joke. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Before I could collect myself, a sharp pain radiated from my shoulder as someone shoved me backward. "Emily, have you lost your mind?" my father's voice thundered. "She's your sister. She's pregnant. How dare you hit her?" He stood in front of Chloe, his eyes blazing with outrage as if I'd just committed a crime. "What's wrong with you? Have you completely gone insane?" "She stole my diary." I shot back, my tone cold and steady. "And you, what did you say then?" For a moment the room went silent. I caught the flicker of guilt that crossed my father's face, brief but unmistakable. The truth was that stolen diary had once marked the beginning of my exile from the Cole household. Even though we lived under the same roof, my bedroom had never truly been mine. I'd asked for a lock once, and my stepmother had smiled sweetly and said, "Locks make it difficult for the maids to clean, dear. You don't want to make their jobs harder, do you?" And so, year after year, Chloe's bedroom had always been secured with the most advanced fingerprint lock money could buy. Mine, on the other hand, had none. But the teenage me still believed, naively, that fairness existed. So one day, I gathered up my courage and asked my father to install a lock on my door too. He refused. "What could you possibly have in there worth locking up?" he scoffed. "Stop acting like you're so special." Not long after that, my diary disappeared. I tore the entire house apart looking for it, but never found it. Eventually, I realized someone had stolen it. I begged my father to check the surveillance footage. It was the first time I had ever cried in front of him. That diary wasn't worth anything to them, but to me, it was everything. It held all my thoughts, my dreams, the secrets of my girlhood. It was my most precious treasure. But no matter how much I cried or pleaded, he just stood there, arms crossed, his expression full of irritation. When I finally told him that I believed someone in the house had taken it, he slapped me across the face and snapped, "Who are you calling a thief? You're the only one in this house who looks like one. Maybe you stole something yourself, and now you're pretending to be the victim." That night, with my cheek burning and swollen, I packed a few books and some clothes, and walked out of the Cole residence without looking back. He had known the truth all along. He just chose to protect his precious younger daughter. And even now, all these years later, he was still doing the same thing. "Stolen? Don't be ridiculous," my father barked, his voice full of disdain. "If you hadn't left it lying around, Chloe wouldn't have found it. I haven't even scolded you yet. A girl who spends her days chasing after men instead of studying, you're a disgrace." He jabbed a finger toward me, his face red with anger. My stepmother seized the moment to pile on. "Emily, your sister knew how much you liked Ethan. she said, her tone full of false sympathy. That's why she went abroad for years, to give you a chance. But love can't be forced, dear. You've been by Ethan's side for so long, yet his heart has always belonged to someone else. What can you do? The moment those words left her mouth, every camera in the room swiveled toward Ethan Summers. Under the glare of the spotlights, his expression darkened, tight, unreadable. A reporter immediately jumped in. Mr. Summers, is it true that Miss Cole has been pursuing you all these years? That her feelings have always been one-sided? Dozens of microphones thrust toward him. He glanced at me. In that brief moment, I saw it. The flicker of guilt, the struggle, the shame he tried so hard to hide. It was rare to see guilt on his face. Perhaps it was the words from my diary, raw and sincere, that had struck him. Maybe, for the first time, he regretted throwing me under the bus to shield himself and Chloe. My hands curled tightly into fists. I could feel my nails digging into my palms, grounding me, holding back the storm rising in my chest. I was ready to rip off their carefully crafted masks in front of the entire room when, suddenly, a voice echoed through the speakers. Ethan, what were you thinking? It was a man's voice, calm but laced with disbelief. You were about to marry Emily Cole, and then suddenly you turn around and register a marriage with Chloe? Don't you feel any guilt toward Emily? Ethan's voice came next, recorded, unmistakably his. You don't understand. Chloe suffered humiliation because of me. She's physically fragile. She couldn't go through with an abortion. She's carrying the child alone, and I can't just abandon her. What would she do once the baby is born? And what about Emily? The first voice demanded. She's been with you from the very beginning. Don't you think sacrificing her to repay a debt is unfair to her? There was a pause, and then Ethan's voice again, softer but steady. Emily and I have been together for 8 years. She understands me. She's always supported every decision I've made. Maybe. We don't need a marriage certificate between us. But Chloe is different. She's weak. She can't take care of herself. The entire hall went silent. Ethan stood frozen on stage, as if struck by lightning. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes wide open, unmoving, like a cold, lifeless statue carved from stone. The entire room could hear the recording clearly. His voice, Ethan Summers, unmistakable. The other belonged to one of his so-called brothers, his closest friend. I hadn't expected the recording to be this powerful. It did far more damage than any words I could have said. Ethan was completely rigid, pale, trembling, exposed. This is fake. Chloe shouted suddenly, her voice shrill with panic. It's been fabricated, completely made up. Where did you even get this recording, Emily? Did you edit it together yourself? Are you really trying to destroy Ethan like this? She was the first to lose control. Her expression twisted as she lunged at me, wild-eyed like an animal cornered. But before she could reach me, I stepped aside swiftly. And just then, the giant LED screen behind the stage lit up, bright, blinding. A Bluetooth connection flickered on, followed by a video that began playing automatically. It was filmed inside a luxury hotel conference room, the same one rented for this press event. The massive LCD screen filled the wall, and the moment the video began, the entire hall was flooded with gasps. Baby, a sugary voice cooed from the speakers. I came back to the country this time just to give you a son. You'd better not treat me badly, okay? The camera showed Chloe, wearing nothing but a silky white nightgown, perched on the lap of a balding, middle-aged man with a greasy face. Without hesitation, her delicate lips pressed against his sweaty cheek, then slid lower in a way that made several reporters audibly gasp. Don't worry, sweetheart, the man panted. Once I transfer everything from that she-devil's account, I'll come back for you. You'll just have to put up with things for now. That woman's sharp as hell, but don't worry. I've already got a backup plan. Once the time's right, I'll make sure we're officially married. Our child will be born legitimate. The recording cut off abruptly after that. The silence that followed was absolute, and then shattered. It was frankly entertaining, even more dramatic than the soap operas people binge online. For a moment, even I was speechless, staring at Chloe in disbelief. She had stolen my fiancé, destroyed my reputation, humiliated me publicly, and yet now knowing the truth, I found myself almost pitying Ethan. His face had gone ghostly white. His eyes shifted slowly from the video to Chloe, horror and rage colliding inside him. The veins at his temples bulged, his chest heaved, his lips moved, but no sound came out. My father's face was ashen, while my stepmother's expression was a twisted mess of panic and guilt. She stumbled toward the screen, throwing her arms wide to block it. "Don't look, no one's allowed to film this. Stop recording," she shrieked, but it was too late. The press had already lost control. Cameras flashed wildly, voices rose, and the room descended into total chaos. And yet somehow, miraculously, Chloe didn't miscarry, despite her violent outburst. The next morning, the entire internet exploded. The press conference shot straight to the top of the trending searches. Ethan Summers leaves 8-year fiancée to raise another man's baby. CEO becomes the fool in his own love triangle. White Moonlight turns out to be the biggest scam of the year. The headlines were merciless. They mocked Ethan for losing his fiancée, his money, his reputation, and even his dignity, all in one day. Some joked that not even the famously foolish William Bao Xuan could dig a hole as deep as his. And as for me, somehow I walked away untouched. Not a single headline mentioned my name. No praise, no pity, no criticism. It was as if I'd never existed in the story at all. Chloe, on the other hand, hid herself away in a hospital, refusing to see anyone. But she could hide from the reporters. She couldn't hide from the consequences. Because before long, the wife of that wealthy businessman, the one in the video, heard the news all the way from overseas. And then one morning, Chloe vanished. She and her pregnant belly disappeared from the hospital without a trace. My father and stepmother went nearly insane searching for her. But he was no longer the powerful man he used to be. He had no money, no influence, no connections. He didn't even dare call the police. In the end, he had no choice but to beg Ethan Summers for help. But by that point, Ethan hated Chloe Cole with every bone in his body. And that was only the beginning. He could barely protect himself. How could he possibly help anyone else? Even if Ethan had the means, there was no way he'd lift a finger for them now. So in the end, my father and stepmother had no choice but to turn to me. When my phone lit up with his name, I actually laughed. The irony was almost sweet. I even offered him some friendly advice. "Call the police," I said lightly. There was silence on the other end. Then came his trembling, pitiful voice. "Emily, I know I've wronged you all these years. You can hate me, curse me, but please, just this once. Pretend I still have the right to ask. Help me find your sister." I had never heard him sound so desperate. Even his apology, faint and hoarse, carried a sincerity that might have moved me once upon a time. "When we find her," he said again, voice quivering, "I'll kneel before you. I'll beg for your forgiveness." His words were firm, solemn, but I didn't move. I was far past the age when a single apology could mend a lifetime of wounds. I closed my eyes, tracing a finger along the painted pattern on the porcelain plate in front of me. "There's no need," I said calmly. "I stopped caring a long time ago." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't bitterness either. It was simply nothing. I had run out of reasons to care. But before hanging up, I gave him one final reminder, purely out of moral courtesy. "You don't need me to tell you this," I said softly. "But I think you already know who Chloe's offended." Then I ended the call, not waiting for his reply. When I looked up, Julian Reed, sitting across from me, was watching with that same teasing smirk of his. "Now," I said, picking up where we'd left off, "shall we get back to discussing the compensation package for the new company?" Just today, he had officially acquired all of Ethan Summers' shares and smoothly taken over the entire firm. The funniest part was, up until the very last second before being expelled from the board, Ethan still believed that the 15% stake he had given me was his trump card, his safety net. "How does Miss Cole wish to negotiate?" Quinn asked lazily. By some coincidence, or perhaps poetic symmetry, we were sitting in the exact same seats as the first time I had come to meet him about a business deal. His face, his slightly slouched posture, and that languid tone all remained the same. The last syllable of his question lingered, drawn out deliberately, as his long, pale fingers toyed idly with a silver lighter. His whole demeanor was relaxed, bordering on careless. "That depends," I replied, pressing my lips together, fighting a faint smile, "on what kind of offer Mr. Lancaster is willing to make me." Click. He closed the lighter with a soft snap and looked up. His gaze sharpened, his expression turning unexpectedly serious. Slowly, he sat up straight. If Miss Cole is willing, he said, his voice even, then the offer I'd like to make is the position of Mrs. Lancaster. For a moment I froze. The tips of my fingers went numb. Mr. Lancaster, I said at last, forcing a tired smile, you must have seen the press conference. He didn't answer. I rested my chin in my hand and continued quietly. Right now, I don't have the courage to start something new. My honesty didn't seem to disappoint him. Instead, he nodded in understanding. I get it, he said. Even if the garbage has been taken out, the stench still lingers. The metaphor was so spot on that I couldn't help but laugh, though I didn't know whether to cry or thank him for saying it. But Emily, he added, his tone softening, if one day you decide you want to love again, consider giving me the first chance. Let me try to pursue you. Then, in a mock pleading gesture, he raised his index finger, touching his own chin with exaggerated charm. Come on, at least give me some credit for the face, yeah? I stared at that handsome, almost model-perfect face of his, and, despite myself, felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. Julian Reed had a very unique way of courting someone. By the way, he suddenly said, tilting his head, why are you wearing the same outfit as the other day? People might think my company's financial situation is worse than it actually is. Take a day off tomorrow. Go shopping. A notification chimed on my phone a second later. He had just transferred me a 7-figure sum. A sudden business trip to Turkey. That was how he phrased it. The private jet was already arranged, ready to take off at any moment. We can make a quick stop in Tokyo, Paris, or anywhere else you'd like, Quinn said casually. It doesn't matter. Everything else can be replaced with new things anyway. Don't overthink it. Just consider it a normal business dinner. Then he added with a grin. Though technically, it's under the name of my cousin's wedding. My parents will be there. The man sitting next to me with the clueless smile is my dad, and the woman who keeps smacking him on the head is my mom. They already know you're my secretary, so they won't make things awkward. They actually think you're brilliant, though. Next to me, I suppose you're more like a daisy growing beside a cowpat. I sat down quietly, trying to make myself small to reduce my presence as much as possible. The truth is, falling for Julian Reed wasn't hard. His affection was simple, direct, and honest. He didn't assume that because I was independent, I didn't need support, or that because I was mature, I didn't need romance. He pursued me the way a man pursues a girl he genuinely likes, earnest, sincere, and sometimes a little clumsy. He once told me he'd read that women like domineering CEOs who shower them with money. So he decided to test the theory, treating work trips like secret dates, taking me to Tokyo, Paris, and Istanbul, convinced I'd find them romantic. I never told him that my 18th birthday had been one of the loneliest days of my life, but on my 30th, he somehow found out, and made me a cake with his own hands. He even threw a mini party at the office. This is a longevity peach bun cake, he explained proudly as I stared at the pink peach-shaped buns arranged like frosting. It's a thing from Chinese birthday banquets. The real cake is just for you. But the buns, those are for everyone else. Then he winked. Besides, I can buy you all the cakes in the world. We don't need to share a moldy bun, do we? Every morning after that, a fresh tulip appeared on my desk. Quinn, I asked one day, genuinely curious, how did you know I liked tulips? I'd never told anyone that before, not even Ethan Summers. In fact, Ethan never once gave me flowers. Quinn leaned back in his chair, his tone effortlessly smug. A guess, he said. I noticed that the cover of your diary shown at the press conference had tulips on it. Figured you might like them, so I went with it. The first time you saw them, you smiled so brightly it confirmed I was right. He said it so matter-of-factly, so confidently, that it made my chest ache a little. I looked at him, hesitating. So, you did watch the press conference? He nodded. Then you must have heard the part where Chloe read from my diary. Even though I didn't find the words themselves shameful, it was impossible to act unaffected after having my teenage heart laid bare in front of the entire world. I studied him closely, not wanting to miss even the smallest flicker of emotion on his face. Quinn's expression darkened, his usual light-heartedness faded, replaced by something quiet and heavy. Yeah, he said softly. I heard it, and honestly I hated it. I hated how they twisted something so pure. His tone made my heart sink. My fingers clenched together beneath the table. I was about to excuse myself, ready to flee before the weight of the moment could suffocate me, when he suddenly leaned forward, his voice rough and sharp with frustration. "Why the hell?" he said through gritted teeth. "Did the honor of being loved by you have to go to him and not me?" His jaw tightened, and I could almost hear his teeth creak as he clenched them. I couldn't help it, watching this powerful, composed man stomping his foot in mock outrage and pounding his chest like a sulking child. It was so ridiculous that I burst out laughing. Without thinking, I leaned forward, closing the distance between us until we were only inches apart. And right then, I saw it clearly. Julian Reed's face flushing a deep, unmistakable red. That expression of his, flustered, cornered, and blushing, was, honestly, a little cute. The amusement in my eyes deepened. I leaned closer, bracing one hand against the wall behind Quinn, letting my body hover just inches from his. My voice was calm, almost teasing. "If you never got to experience the sweetness of being secretly loved," I said softly, "then tell me, would you dare to accept the sweetness of being truly loved?" He froze, and for a moment the air between us seemed to hum. But before he could answer, my thoughts drifted elsewhere, to Ethan Summers, the man who once believed he had everything. The thing Ethan regretted most wasn't betraying me. It was that moment of weakness when Chloe came to him and he let her in. Ethan had been born into privilege, a wealthy family, a mansion, private schools, the world handed to him on a silver platter. He was pampered, sheltered, and arrogant. Until, when he was 15, everything came crashing down. His father's company went bankrupt overnight. The man couldn't handle the disgrace and hanged himself in the study. Ethan and his mother were evicted from their estate and forced to rent a damp 40-square-meter basement apartment. To support them, his mother, once a refined socialite, took on menial jobs, working herself to exhaustion. Within a year, she fell ill and passed away. The most tragic part? The treatment had cost only 20,000 yuan, barely $3,000. Such a small sum, and he hadn't been able to pay it. That became the defining wound of his life. From that moment on, Ethan made a vow to rebuild his fortune, no matter the cost, no matter who he had to use. He learned to bow, to flatter, to smile, while swallowing humiliation. In college, he heard that a newly wealthy businessman was looking to invest in promising startups. Determined to seize the chance, Ethan used every connection he had to get close. Eventually, he discovered that the man's youngest daughter was celebrating her birthday. He scrimped and starved for 3 months, maxed out his credit card, and finally saved enough to buy a respectable gift. He showed up at the party, dressed neatly, trying his best to fit in. Under the bright chandeliers, surrounded by glittering laughter and champagne flutes, he saw the Cole family's youngest princess, Chloe, glowing in her expensive dress, surrounded by admirers. For a fleeting second, he felt like a stranger in a world he once belonged to. He watched as the gift he'd prepared with such care was tossed aside, landing forgotten in a pile of more extravagant presents. And when the cake was served, he realized he wasn't even close enough to be offered a single bite, so he left early, defeated and bitter. Outside, under the dim lights, he saw a girl crouched by the stone steps, palms pressed together in front of a small plate of steamed buns with a candle stuck in one. She was quietly making a wish. For some inexplicable reason, he felt an odd connection to her, as if they shared the same loneliness, the same quiet ache. Something drew him closer. He walked up and made a teasing comment, half out of habit, half out of curiosity. Later, he learned her name, Emily Cole, the eldest daughter of the Cole family. She wasn't unloved exactly, just invisible, a presence too ordinary to notice. While her sister Chloe shone like the sun, Emily lingered quietly in the shadows. Chloe was bright, proud, dazzling, just like the old Ethan before his world collapsed. Emily, on the other hand, was soft-spoken, grounded, humble, like the person he'd become after everything was stripped away. So Ethan understood Emily. He even cherished her. But deep down, he longed for Chloe, the version of himself that had been lost. Even after he graduated, even when he was already with me, that desire festered. Back then, he had gathered his courage to speak to my father, asking for permission to court Chloe. He thought my father supported his business because he saw potential in him. But instead, my father laughed in his face. "You, a poor boy like you dreaming of marrying my daughter?" he sneered. "You're a toad wanting to eat swan meat. be realistic. You might suit my older daughter, but my youngest, she's a gem. You're not even qualified to touch her shadow." That single sentence branded Ethan for life. Even years later, when he was by my side, when I gave him my loyalty, my trust, my youth, he never forgot those words. They haunted him. He knew I was good to him. He knew we had struggled through everything together. But that wound, that humiliation, had taken root too deep. And maybe that's why, even when he had me, his heart kept chasing after a ghost. During one of his overseas business trips, everything began to unravel. The day Ethan Summers was about to secure a major project for his company, he had already made up his mind. He had bought a diamond ring and planned to propose to me, Emily Cole, as soon as he returned to the country. But fate had other plans. He hadn't expected to run into Chloe again. Even though the Cole family had gone bankrupt, Chloe still radiated her usual brilliance, elegant, untarnished, dazzling as ever. Seeing her again felt like reuniting with a long-lost dream, a piece of the world he once belonged to. They talked. Ethan could tell that she was still well cared for, still pure and untainted by hardship. And yet what happened next was something neither of them had anticipated. To help him close that crucial business deal, Chloe ended up being kidnapped and assaulted. Afterward, she told him she didn't mind, urging him to return home and focus on work. But the guilt gnawed at him. Later, Chloe came back to the country, sought him out, and tearfully confessed that she was pregnant. She said her condition was delicate, that she couldn't terminate the pregnancy, and begged him to give her child a name, a place, a father. Otherwise, she said, she couldn't go on living. Ethan watched her cry until she could barely breathe. His heart softened. He knew that by doing this, he would be betraying me completely. Still, he took the diamond ring he'd bought for me and slid it onto her finger instead. The next day, he went with her to register their marriage. The wedding announcement on WeChat? That was Chloe's request. She said she wanted her child to be born with legitimacy, not shame. She promised him it would only be for 1 year, just 1 year. After the baby was born, she said, she would file for divorce and set him free. Ethan convinced himself this was an act of compassion, that sacrificing our relationship for a year was a small price to pay for saving a life. When I confronted him, he looked at me with guilt, but also with conviction. "Just give me 1 year," he said. "When it's over, everything will go back to the way it was." I remember I didn't say much. I just smiled faintly, but deep down he could feel my distance. That terrified him. So, trying to make up for it, he transferred 15% of his company shares to me, the same portion I had once helped him earn with my own investment and work. To me, it was simply my due. But to him, it was a gesture of reassurance, a sign that I still trusted him, that I was willing to wait. He was wrong. What followed completely shattered that illusion. At the press conference, the brother he trusted most turned on him, publicly releasing the recording of their private conversation. Even Chloe betrayed him, exposing him to humiliation and ruin. In an instant, everything he had, his company, his marriage, his reputation, was gone. He went to confront that so-called brother, demanding answers, but all he got in return was a hard punch to the face. His friend told him coldly, "I'm just doing justice. Young Master Lancaster wanted the truth revealed, and this is your karma. You reap what you sow." That was the moment Ethan finally laughed. He staggered back to his empty mansion, his face bruised and bleeding, and began a year-long descent into oblivion, drinking himself numb, drifting through the days in a haze of alcohol and regret. And then one morning, he noticed the calendar. The date circled in red. 1 year. The promise. The 1-year mark of the vow he had made to me. Almost without thinking, he reached for his phone and dialed a number his fingers still remembered by heart, one he hadn't dared to call in months. The line rang only once before connecting. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The sound of my voice, familiar, distant, achingly calm, hit him like a dream he couldn't wake from. It felt, just for a second, like time had rewound, like the past 8 years had been erased, and we were back at the beginning, before the betrayal, before the heartbreak, before everything had fallen apart. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "Emily, the 1-year promise, it's over now? Can we start over again?" He held the phone in his trembling hand, his palms slick with sweat. His voice shook as he spoke. The wait lasted only a few seconds, but to Ethan Summers it felt like an eternity. His heart pounded so hard it nearly leapt out of his chest. And then, after what felt like a century, came a short, bitter laugh, followed by a bright, silvery voice that he would recognize anywhere. "My child isn't some bastard that needs a cheap substitute for a father," I said coolly. "No need to go looking for one." In that instant, it was as if a knife had been driven straight through his heart. The pain was sharp and deep, bleeding into every part of him until the world collapsed completely. He hung up. Meanwhile, I, Emily Cole, rested a hand on my stomach. Though I was only 4 months along, the bump was already showing prominently. Twins. Julian Reed sat right beside me, hovering close like a loyal guard dog, his attention on the news flashing across the TV screen. It was on me. His sharp eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Who was that?" he asked. "What sharp ears?" I reached over and tugged playfully on his ear, then pointed to my belly with a grin. "How many men do you think want the honor of being a cheap stand-in father?" Quinn snorted. "Cheap, huh?" Then, as if to make a point, he dramatically pulled out our marriage certificate, setting one hand on his hip and lifting his chin proudly. "Well," he said smugly, "our son and daughter won't be missing their father's name on the birth certificate, and I'm damn proud of that." 3 months earlier, Quinn and I had gone to register our marriage. We hadn't expected that during the routine medical checkup. The doctor would tell us I was already 1 month pregnant. It was hard to describe the sight of Julian Reed, the dignified CEO of a publicly listed company, standing in the civil affairs office, grinning ear to ear and shouting to everyone around, "I'm going to be a dad." He looked absolutely ridiculous, especially after finding out we were having twins. From that moment on, he strutted around the house like a peacock with its tail fanned wide, so proud of himself he could barely stand still. He even went as far as printing my pregnancy report on a huge poster and hanging it right in the middle of his family's ancestral living room. That little stunt immediately made him the collective enemy of his entire family. Childish. Absolutely childish. But endearing too. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scold him. Instead, I pulled him down beside me on the couch. Then I squinted, scanning him up and down suspiciously. "By the way," I said slowly, "you met with Harrison a while back, didn't you?" Quinn blinked, caught off guard. "Who?" "Harrison," I repeated. "Ethan's old buddy." His expression stiffened, and his eyes darted around a little too fast. I raised an eyebrow and brushed my fingers against his chin, smiling sweetly. "Don't tell me you don't know who I mean. He told me that about a year ago, someone came to him asking for a favor. Helping someone out, you might say." Quinn straightened up, answering with mock seriousness. "Helping others is a virtue." "Is it?" I said, tilting my head. Because from what I heard, this particular act of helping happened right around the time Ethan received his marriage certificate. Almost as if someone planned it in advance. The audio recording from that press conference had indeed saved me, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't wondered who had orchestrated it all. Quinn's expression froze. Then, after a long pause, he sighed, his facade crumbling completely. He grabbed my hand, his voice firm but honest. "Fine," he admitted. "The moment I heard he'd gone to register that marriage, I was so damn happy I couldn't sleep all night. The first time I saw you standing behind that bastard at the auction, looking so fragile, I remember thinking, how could someone like him deserve an angel like you?" I chuckled softly, leaning in to press my lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tender, and full of warmth. "Well," I whispered against his mouth, "looks like that angel finally found her way home." Just then the TV volume rose as the news anchor's voice came through clearly. After continuous investigation and cooperation between international and local authorities, the reporter announced, a major human trafficking network in Myanmar has been successfully dismantled. Dozens of women have been rescued and returned home safely. Among the victims was a woman surnamed Cole, who sustained the most serious injuries. She has just managed to contact her family. Do you think silence at the end hurts more than an honest goodbye? Love and Lies story.